And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of stillcurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas, as well as one of our top contributors, Andrew Falce, here for today's NFL draft-specific episode. The draft starts tomorrow. We're all pumped up about it. We are going to give you each our 7-round predictive mock drafts for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the second half of the show today, so please stick around for that. We're going to try to see how many of these picks we can get right. Where are the trail of breadcrumbs leading us to when it comes to the Steelers draft picks? We're also going to have just a roundtable discussion today, so please pop in the chat for that. We'd love to hear your thoughts as we discuss some of our favorite picks, our nightmare scenarios for the Steelers, trade scenarios, and bold predictions. So stay with us for that as well. We're going to start things off today, though, with a little bit of Steelers news. And the Steelers will reportedly decline the fifth-year option for Justin Fields. Who did this come from? ESPN's Adam Schefter today?
I believe so, yeah.
So it doesn't come as a big surprise. I wrote about this over a month ago and said why it's really an obvious choice to decline this option for Fields. It's not that I don't want him around after the 2024 season. It's just when you fully guarantee $25 million to a quarterback, you better make sure that they're your starter at least, and that they're a pretty good player. And so I think from every angle, Shayne and Andrew, it feels like the Steelers can get Fields back cheaper if they want to, because the interest wasn't there to begin with. When he was on the trade dock, nobody was willing to trade more than a late round pick swap for him. And so, even if you go back to the 2021 NFL draft, Fields was the fourth quarterback taken. And so all the way from then to now, not a lot of interest from teams, even though I think that he's coming off his best season at age 24. If the Steelers get something done eventually, it doesn't look like it's going to be the fifth-year option.
Yeah, and I feel like this was obviously the right move because you don't know yet what his future with this team is. You don't know if he's just going to be a backup for this year and you send him on his way. You don't know if he's going to end up being the starter at some point this season. You don't know if he's going to start the year as a starter, right? Like, we still have that up in the air a little bit. I know Wilson is being told that he's kind of in the pole position, but it's Russell Wilson in 2024. I'm not guaranteeing anything as far as him being the starter. So I think, for example, like if they do name him the starter early in the season, so maybe not immediately, but at some point early, then they go to the contract talks and say, hey, we're going to do a kind of similar to what the Packers did with Jordan Love. We're not going to give you the fifth-year option. We're going to kind of change it up a little bit. We're going to make it like a little bit more team-friendly, but still giving you another year under contract. Then you can have a chance on a full year starting to prove that we should sign you long-term. So that's what I'm more expecting, especially if he ends up starting. And if he doesn't, then it comes down to, does he want to come back to compete again with maybe a different guy that he's competing with?
Yeah, I think, like you said, with that Justin Love, or not Justin Love, Jordan Love's Love, contract. Yeah. Combine the two. Jordan Love's contract from, a little bit ago where he didn't get your option. He hadn't proven himself yet. Yeah. I think you're going to look at something like that. I think you can get some incentives into that deal, maybe, like they did kind of with Mitch Trubisky's contract.
Right.
So he didn't end up hitting any because he got benched for Kenny Pickett.
Right.
So it was like a fever dream based off how everything's changed this offseason.
Yeah.
But I think that's your best bet because you get that lower initial cap hit. You don't have all that money locked into him. But, you're also traded for him for obvious reasons. You see some sort of future with him. You don't want to just give up after a year when you already have Russell Wilson here. It's going to be really hard to give a full, grade of him, assuming he's not starting the entire year.
Right.
So I think trying to work out some sort of just a short-term deal, 1, maybe 2 years, less than what that fifth-year option cost is, but something that's still going to pay him well. It's not like he's going to take pennies on the dollar either.
No,
you look at what good backup quarterbacks are getting, and he's going to want more than that as someone that could potentially be a starter.
Right.
Yeah, and if you look at that, I mean, if we're find ourselves in a situation where Justin Fields deserves more than $25 million a year, it's probably because he did something really good for the Steelers
at that point, great.
In 2024.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with that. If that ends up being the case and you lose out on a few million difference because you didn't give him the fifth-year option, so be it. It's just not worth tying into that much guaranteed money for a guy that you can't guarantee is going to be the starting quarterback next year. And so the reasoning is pretty simple. It's the decision I expected them to make. And we'll see if something eventually gets done. Might not happen until early next offseason where the Steelers try to give Fields a contract extension. I don't think he's going to have enough incentive to sign right away. He's probably going to bet on himself and see how things play out this year. All right. The Steelers are rumored to be in trade talks with the Denver Broncos, according to Tony Pauline of Sportskeeda. I don't know what to read into this because Tony Pauline is making it sound like the Steelers are looking to move up for specifically cornerback Quinion Mitchell out of Toledo. The Steelers have expressed no interest in this guy leading up to the pre-draft process. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't take him. I remember just last year, they didn't really meet with Devin Witherspoon. It doesn't mean they wouldn't have taken him. So I can see some parallels between the two, but it's interesting that this is coming out just now. And if you are to trade, like, I think the philosophy's bad here. Like, I like Mitchell, but if you're trading up into the top 12 for a player, it should be a quarterback, and they don't need a quarterback. Obviously right now, they're not going to view that as a need in their eyes. And so I don't understand. I don't have Mitchell like that much higher than the potential prospects that would be available for the Steelers, that you would have to pull the trigger on a move like this. If we go back to 2019, it cost the Steelers a first, a second, and a future third to trade up for Devin Bush, going from pick 20 to pick 10. So it would require similar draft capital to go up and get Mitchell. Is that worth it?
For me, no, because as much as I like Mitchell, I also just am not trading with the Broncos again, and just the bad juju of the Devin Bush trade. No, that's not really. I mean, that's not really it. But no, in general, I don't believe in doing that for a team that has the needs we still have. Despite a good overall free agency for this team, especially by the Steelers standards, we don't do a ton until Khan kind of stepped in that area of the offseason. But we still have a lot of needs, right? I don't think you can be hemorrhaging picks this year or next year and to go up and get a player that, while I do think is very good and would immediately be, a starter alongside Joey Porter Jr., I don't think it's that much of an upgrade over some of the other guys you could get, like you said, at 20, Tommy specifically. And more importantly, again, they should be looking to trade down more than up if they are going to trade. Like, I don't think this is a team that can, like I said, that could sacrifice picks this year when they're trying to build a foundation, not only defensively for the future, because they do have older players there, but also offensively. Now that we're past the Canada era, we have to start solidifying, what do we want this offense to look like? And right now it's not complete.
Yeah, I think you guys hit the nail on the head. It'd be one thing if we only had, one or two needs in this upcoming draft cycle, but we don't.
Exactly.
Tackle, big need. Center, big need. Cornerback, there is a need there, but, I think I'm a little higher on Dante Jackson than most. I think he can be a fine, serviceable number 2 cornerback for the year that we have him under contract. Obviously, there's going to be a long-term need there across from Joey Porter, but I'm fine rolling with him, and I'd rather use our limited capital that we have to fill the needs that are a lot more pressing. So to have to trade up, lose some of that capital in order to get him, in addition to then not filling what I would see as one of the biggest needs on the team, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Again, I think the board's going to break pretty well for the team. You look at all the quarterbacks that are going to push players down. I think pick 20 is going to have a lot of really nice options, whether it be an offensive tackle or a center or even a cornerback. If they really wanted to go that route, it might not be Mitchell, but I mean, you could potentially see, Terrion Arnold available. But I don't see the point of trading up right now when, in my opinion, you're probably going to have the pick of the litter of names that you want, whether it be that starting center, whether it is that right tackle that you want to get. I can't stomach a move up, especially that high, knowing what it's going to cost.
Yeah, and I think Pauline's report would hold a little bit more weight to it had the Steelers expressed interest in Mitchell along the way. You got to go back to he's not even a Power 5 player. And it's not to say the Steelers wouldn't break that trend, but you're going against multiple trends now. I mean, there's just no visits throughout the process. You take a non-Power 5 guy that you just don't do. And so I think if they were to come up, and maybe there are talks about coming up, it's probably not for that player, I wouldn't imagine, unless they are really high on a guy that they've just never met with during the pre-draft process. Obviously, they saw him at the Senior Bowl, played very well there. And so maybe that's enough for them. I don't think that they would be willing to stake multiple high draft picks on a player that they didn't meet with from the end of February until now. And so I don't think that that's very realistic. Although they could be looking to move up. And this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later in here, different types of trade scenarios for the Steelers. So that's worth putting out there, at least that Pauline had that in his notes that the Steelers are supposedly in talks about moving up with the Denver Broncos. All right. The Steelers restructured the contract of Alex Highsmith today, just really like an hour before recording this show. And so we have to wonder what that means. Obviously, restructures can happen for a variety of different reasons. You needed more cap space. I looked at over the cap just before that. The Steelers had $11.1 million in salary cap space heading into the draft. Now, if you think about it that way, that's more than enough money to get your players signed. Do they want a little extra flexibility in here? Could this lead to a trade for Brandon Ayuk or Cortland Sutton. Ayuk has a cap number of 13.2 million, I want to say, and in Sutton's, I think, is just over 17 million. And so now, after clearing up $7 additional million for the 2024 season with the Alex Highsmith restructure, the Steelers have just over $18 million to work with in salary cap space. Could there be a trade coming here?
I think it's still possible. It does still feel like, even for Khan, who has been much more aggressive than Colbert ever was, right? We've seen him do things that typically I would just be like, oh, no, the Steelers are going to do that. It's the Steelers, right? Not so much with Khan. And I think this would be taking it to an extreme level, obviously. But I think there's interest there, both from Ayuk's team. I think that they'd be interested in this. I think the 49ers understand that they probably can't afford to keep him and Samuel and the rest of this core together long term, and they have to start to prioritize who that's going to be that they keep around. Now, if it's me, I'm prioritizing Ayuk because I think he's the best player on the offense outside of maybe McCaffrey. But it's still possible that they decide, you know what, we're not going to pay this guy top of the line receiver money when our offense doesn't necessarily need that to survive, right? Whereas the Steelers could really use that type of weapon opposite George Pickens to allow these quarterbacks, whoever it ends up being, to thrive as much as possible, right? With all the offensive ineptitude we've had. So it would make sense. I do think there is the question of the contract. How high is it actually going to be? Is it going to be 30 million plus? Because that is the top of the receiver market right now. I wonder if they could get him for a little bit less than that, because he has only 1 year of true like elite production with the Niners. He doesn't have as much leverage as, you know, some of the other guys who've gotten those contracts. But still, it is a huge investment. But this could mean that they're at least still interested in trying to get it done.
I'd argue that he has a lot of leverage if you're going to go out of your way to trade for him. Obviously, you want him. You don't want it to be a 1 year rental. So I don't see why he wouldn't be asking for that top of the receiver market, especially when you just saw St. Brown get the contract that he got in a similar time frame. I mean, that just got reported like an hour. I think overall, I think people are slightly overreacting to this. More than likely, Highsmith's contract was going to get restructured no matter what. They needed that cap space long term. Now, that could have happened in the summer. It could have opened up that space then. And like you said, I think it just gives them that flexibility where if the deal that they want comes in for whether it be, you know, Sutton or whoever, you know, they have that option then to make that trade and still be cap compliant. I would start with probably a 3rd round pick. I don't really want to deal my 2nd round pick for any receiver this year, just because I think you need to really be targeting the offensive line. You could also potentially draft a receiver. And you've also seen the receiver market as a whole be kind of cool this offseason. So I don't know why people are saying it's going to cost a 1st round pick either this year or next year. I think that wouldn't be wise, considering you saw what Stephon Diggs go for a 2nd next year. In addition to them also having to give up a couple late round picks in order to make that trade go through. I'm open to a deal. I don't think that this restructure necessarily means that it's slam dunk going to happen. Again, it's something that was probably going to happen regardless. It just gives you that flexibility, though, if the right price comes in for whatever receiver you might be targeting.
Yeah, and if somebody asks why is this restructure coming before the draft instead of after the draft, it could be for that reason, though, to keep all their options open, if so they can entertain trades and see what kind of offers are out there. Now, to me, I'm a huge Brandon Ayuk fan, but depending on the asking price, it's really hard for me to trade elite draft capital and turn around and pay the guy 25, 28, maybe $30 million a year. Like, the receiver market is through the roof right now in terms of what these guys are getting paid. And so are the Steelers in a position to strike like that? I know that most fans would be on board with this. It would make the team better. I don't have any doubts about that. It's just, are you close enough to Super Bowl contention when you haven't won a playoff game in 6 years? And so I think maybe start with a little bit of playoff success before you try to do like an AJ Brown level move where they can get you into Super Bowl contention. Now, for the 49ers, I don't think that would make any sense to them, really, because realistically, San Francisco has 3 years left of control of Ayuk. You can throw the 5th-year option out there, which would be a steal for a receiver like him, averaging the top 10 money or whatever it is. Franchise tag, double franchise tag. That's 3 years of control. He's worth that in my mind, because I think he's legitimately like a borderline top 5 receiver in the NFL. You can control that guy for the next 3 years, force him to stay under contract, even if it's slightly disgruntled that he's not getting that long-term deal. And you can capitalize on a Super Bowl window for a team that can win a Super Bowl this year and next year and the year after. So from their perspective, Shayne and Andrew, I don't think it makes any sense. Now, I can understand more so why the Steelers would want to do it. But I don't know if that would be something that they should even entertain in the state that they're in right now. Sutton makes more sense to me in terms of one that works for both parties, just because it could be a contract dump situation where he's not a bad football player, but you're trying to get out of this guy. He turns 29 years old this season. He's got 2 lofty cap numbers coming up this year and the following. And so that could be one where the Steelers would be like, all right, I'll be willing to take on that cap for a much lesser pick than what we'd give up for Brandon Ayuk. And so I can see that one being a possibility. My thought about this is I love this wide receiver class. I know nothing's a guarantee, but you get 4 years of control on a rookie contract that's going to be a fraction of the price of either of these guys. And again, you're not guaranteed to get a success story, but the Steelers are one of the best teams in the league when it comes to drafting receivers on day 2. This is a really strong group of guys. You could get a Ricky Pearsall, an Xavier Legette. There's going to be some options available to you in the second round that are going to be worth exploring, where maybe you're giving up a similar financial investment, but the salary cap investment to your team is far, far less. And it's a team building philosophy, right? If the Steelers are giving up too many picks, how can you expect to build this team from the bones back up again? I loved what they did last year in the draft. It's why the encouragement that I got from last year is why I don't want to trade picks away, because I thought Omar Khan did such a great job when he was on the clock. And so that's the reasoning that I wanted to throw out there. Any more thoughts you guys want to share on that before we move on? All right, we're going to move on to our next discussion topic here. We're going to talk about the NFL draft, and as it pertains to the Pittsburgh Steelers, we're going to begin our NFL draft roundtable. If you guys are joining us here in the live chat, please chime in with questions, and we will answer these as they pop in. And while we're doing that, let's just kick things off with the excitement that is this week of the NFL draft, everything leading up to this point. I've been crazy busy. I'm about to have a lot of sleepless nights here, but I do enjoy this time of year. It's like the second Christmas here, where I get to just plant myself in front of the TV, albeit doing work at the same time. And I've just spent hours of preparation leading up to this point. I'm excited for it. What are you guys' draft plans?
I actually will be live streaming with a group of guys I do a scouting podcast with. So I will be live during all day one, breaking down the picks, talking about all of it. So obviously excited for the Steelers pick, but I will be doing it for the entire first round. So
my 4-month-old has hit a really nasty sleep regression where she only likes to sleep on either me or mom. So mom's going to get a little bit of shut-eye while dad watches the draft with the baby on his chest. So that's my first round plans.
That's fun. That's fine.
There we go. I can relate to that for sure.
I'm sure you can.
Yeah. We're in a similar state here. Kid number 6, you get used to it at that point, though. So, all right, let's talk about some of our favorite prospects in this draft. They can be ones that have been associated with the Steelers or not at all, but I just want to hear from you guys. What are some of your favorite players? It doesn't have to be first round picks. It can be anywhere in the draft. Guys you like.
I'll let Andrew kick things off. I'm curious because I've read some of obviously your mocks and stuff throughout the draft season, but I'm not sure where you're at on some guys. So
yeah, so I got a handful of guys that I pulled up. It's funny because I see in the comments, but he's actually one of my guys, Cornelius Johnson from Michigan. This isn't a guy that's going to wow you on offense. He's not going to be a viable, number 2 receiver, a guy that you're going to depend on, but he's very like Miles Boykin-esque, where I think you can get him. He can be probably a good gunner on your team. He's a very athletic individual, bigger bodied receiver. He blocks. I mean, he's probably one of the best blocking receivers in this draft. My only concern is that you kind of see the receiver pool dry up once we go into day 3. I feel like day 3 as a whole is a pretty shallow in this draft class. Yeah. I don't know if I would put a 4th round grade on him just because I don't think you're going to be getting that offense contribution from him. But he's someone that I like, that if he came into the 6th round, you already got a receiver earlier. You can have him as, your 5th or 6th option, a guy that's going to play special teams for you. And then also a guy that just that big body, possession guy that you can trot out there and still use. It's just I don't see the upside. Another Michigan guy that I liked a lot, Junior Colson. I know he's started to actually receive a lot more hype in the past week or so. Kind of a little bit of a throwback, not the best in coverage, but he reminds me a lot of the Chiefs linebacker, Nick Bolton, where he had similar issues coming out of, Auburn, I believe?
I think
or Missouri, one of those two.
Missouri. It was Missouri. Yeah, you're right, Missouri.
Yeah, where, he was seen more as this, he's going to just be a 2-down thumper, but he's turned into a pretty good 3-down linebacker. I see just a lot of similarities in that tape. I just think he's, you know, a really hard-nosed player, just someone that's fun to watch on tape. Another one I like, MJ
Devonshire.
Devonshire. Thank you.
Yeah, it's MJ Devonshire.
Out of Pitt. Yeah, I love that. You know, he's a little bit smaller, but I think he could play on the outside. He has the athleticism to do it. He has decent length for his size. A guy that I think if he can't play on the outside, and his ceiling isn't that high, he wouldn't be, you know, a top Pro Bowl cornerback, but someone that could come in as that number 2 and take on that second best option, since Porter Jr. is going to be trailing the top receiver in the on, you know, any given Sunday. If he doesn't work on the outside, I think you can move him inside pretty comfortably, and he can work in the slot, so that gives you some flexibility. And he seems like he's going to go somewhere on day 3. I think that's really good value. And then the last one, this is probably one of my biggest draft crushes. If we miss out on an offensive tackle, and they haven't shown a whole lot of interest in him, but I love Patrick Paul. I love the size. I just, you know, he seems just like a good guy overall, just a good teammate. He's someone that I think you can sit and develop this next year. Yeah, you'd still have Dan Moore starting. But long term, I feel like he can comfortably slot into one of the tackle spots, whether you want to keep him on his more comfortable left side or try to move him over to the right so you can get Broderick Jones back over to the left side. But I think he's someone that if you miss out on the tackles in the first round, I would have my eye on him in the second round, assuming he makes it that far, because I think he has the potential to be a really good starter in the league. Maybe not the ceiling that some of the other names in this class have, but someone that can certainly be an upgrade for this line.
Nice. Shayne, do you want to go next or you want me to?
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm just going to start with a guy that I know, like, this is not someone that anyone's going to not know, but I think I'm higher on him than a lot of people are, especially I've seen some stuff about, is he going to be in the first round even at this point, which is very weird to me. Maybe there's medical stuff going on. I don't know. Something we don't know about. But Johnny Newton out of Illinois is my 7th ranked player, period, in the draft right now. I think he's the best defensive tackle to come out as far as being able to rush the passer day 1 in a very long time. I don't know if his ceiling is quite as high as maybe Byron Murphy because of the run defense with him, where he's so stout for his shorter stature. But Newton's also a playmaker against the run, so maybe he's not going to do a lot of the, you know, taking on double teams and being able to beat those as often as Murphy can or is shown. But he is going to still make plays against the run. But more importantly, day 1, I think he's going to be one of the better interior pass rushers that have come out as a rookie in a long time. You know, maybe not Aaron Donald-esque or anything like that, but still in that kind of tier of, like, he's going to be an impactful rusher from day 1. He's just so smart, so refined as a pass rusher, has more than enough juice as well to kind of rush the passer quickly and not just, you know, intelligently. I just think that if he doesn't go in the first round, it better be because of medical stuff and not because of his tape, because I just wouldn't really understand that. Some other guys that I think I'm a little bit higher on than a lot of people. I'm just kind of pulling up I have kind of a list here of my guys right now. 2 guys here, actually. So Roger Rosengarten, the other tackle for Washington, he's gotten some buzz as well. I mean, I think he was even mocked to, like, the Niners at 31 by a couple of people recently. That's a little much for me, but I have him in my top 50 players. So, you know, I'm at 120 right now, kind of finishing out a board for tomorrow, actually, for that stream I told you about. But he's a guy that I think could be a starter day 1 at right tackle and be a good one, and then kind of grow from there. Hopefully he can become like a more than just average starter at right tackle, but he has all the quickness, a little light. That's kind of the main thing with him, is, like, is power going to be a problem for him in the pros? I do think that's certainly possible, but if you have like a real explosive rusher off the edge that you're trying to deal with, he's the type of athlete that you can bank on being able to handle guys like that. So I like him a ton. And then the other guy I wanted to mention as well, Renardo Green, the corner out of FSU. Mm-hmm. It's just you watch the LSU tape and watch him just abuse Malik Neighbors. And I know Neighbors is more, for me, like, as great as he is, I think he is kind of like a Z slot type. Like, I don't know, he's not going to be an X probably. So, like, the press stuff is going to be difficult for him anyway, but he just abused him when he was outside. When he was on him, just pressed him into the line, like, did not let him do anything on him the whole game. Like, that's the type of corner that I would love for the Steelers to be interested in. Now, they didn't show any interest in him, unfortunately. I know when we did our What We Would Do mock, Tommy, I really pushed for him every time we had a chance to get him. So he's a guy, too, that, like, if you can get him, I think he's going to go probably at the end of day 2 somewhere. I would take him in the middle of day 2 at the latest, honestly. Like, that's kind of where I'm at with him. I think he's a day 1 press man corner for you. You know, if you're playing a scheme that you're doing a lot of zone, Might take him a little while to get going because I do think he's not as experienced there. But if you run a man-heavy scheme, which of course Steelers do, I would love him there. But in general, anyone that's going to run a lot of man. So,
all right. I agree with some of those as well. I've got Johnny Newton very high on my board. He's 9th overall, and I think I'm one of the highest when you compare him to some of the big draft boards that are out there. I'm not sure why he's not getting more buzz than what he is, and to see where he is on the consensus board is kind of egregious to me with how good his tape is. So I think that it does have some to do with medicals there.
Has to be something, in my opinion. Has to be something going on there.
A couple guys that I like, and I just can't help it. I can't help myself from liking Spencer Rattler. I'm sorry. There's something about the way that he plays football.
I like him too.
He seems poised. He's collected. I know that he came in short. He didn't test as a great athlete. He had to transfer, and so he had to stay in school a lot longer than we projected. But even going back to his freshman and sophomore days at Oklahoma, I've liked the way that he played football, and I still do. I think that he's accurate. He's got an arm on him, and so I think that he has those traits where he could be Gardner Minshew-esque in a way. Maybe that guy that kind of just hangs around for a while and does a lot of good things with his football intelligence and accuracy. At wide receiver that I really like, Javon Baker. This is a guy that was pointed out to me by one of my draft buddies, and I feel like he should be getting more buzz than what he is. Like, he's phenomenal season this year, number one in the nation in yards per target. He just has that alpha dog mentality. He's going to rip the ball away from you when it's in the air. He can run after the catch. He can do a lot of things. Has good size, strong hands. That's a receiver that I would love at some point on day 2 in the draft, and a guy that I think that is going to be underdrafted from everything that I've heard. I like Ben Sinnott a lot, the tight end this year. If you want a tight end that can block and really move, that's a player. I think this tight end class is getting a little bit underrated. I'm not a huge fan of the guys outside of Bowers, but I do like Sinnott quite a bit, and I've watched his tape as well. Karan Amigdaji, the offensive tackle from Yale. So I'm typically not like, I don't go overboard with the small school guys, but you can intrigue me with traits, especially at the offensive tackle position. And he has a lot of them to work with. I think he's got pretty good feet for as big as he is. And he's got like 36 plus inch arms. And so I love the package to work with. Like, if you can get that guy on day 3, dream pick there. I think he ends up having to go on day 2 somewhere just because the traits are too good to pass on. And then I'm also a sucker for I am, and I apologize if you don't like this guy. I'm a sucker. I'll name 2 of them. I'm a sucker for Mason Smith, and I'm a sucker for Darius Robinson. I like big, long, strong defensive linemen. You might not be refined. You might have a lot more work to do, and you need to put more sand in your pants. But I think those guys I can work with. You can mold them. I think the guys that have the frame to grow into, they get stronger every year. Like Cameron Hayward's getting bigger, stronger every year as he gets into his 30s. And so it intrigues me that Mason Smith has an identical frame that Stephon Tuitt had coming out. It intrigues me that Darius Robinson has an identical frame that Cam Hayward had coming out. I think there is something to those guys. There are very few of them in the NFL. If you can get a DeForest Buckner type, an Eric Armstead type, like those guys can just last forever. If you've got good play strength, I think I can teach you the rest of those things. And so I would bet on those guys figuring it out at some point, and it might take him a few years, but I am a sucker for that upside when it comes to the length and strength of those traits there. All right, let's talk about some dream picks here. And so let's keep this to the first round primarily, but you have a different round that you want to explore, then go ahead for it. What would be, Shayne, your dream picks for the Steelers at whatever stage of the draft?
Real quick, I did want to mention that with your guys, like Rattler is 69th on my board, so I'm definitely pretty
okay.
Like in terms of like consensus, a little higher on him than I think a lot of people are. I think he's just one of those few guys who's a developmental quarterback that actually probably could become a starter because he's talented enough to be one. Like a lot of the developmental quarterbacks, like, oh, they can do some stuff. It's like, no, he can throw the football well enough to actually be a starter. So, but outside of him, so Steelers dream picks, I think the first one you have to talk about, and it's not only because it's a dream pick for me, but because I think it's the pick that might definitely happen. Amarius Mims out of Georgia, just a freak of nature in every way possible as an athlete, as just his frame. I understand there's a lot of concern with the lack of tape because of just the lack of snaps. I understand like there's obviously an injury with him too this year. Like there are certainly red flags in his profile. However, when you watch him play, I can't stop thinking about him and Broderick Jones manning the tackle position for the Steelers for the next decade. And one guy who is, Jones obviously has a lot of length for his frame as well, but like one guy who's like an uber space athlete, like can get out, destroy guys in the run game, and a guy who's just so big and strong and athletic that you can't get around him quickly as a pass rusher. Those two on the same line feels like a great way to keep whoever it ends up being, whatever the next quarterback of this team is long term, can keep them upright for a long time. So that's kind of my first one for sure. I'll talk about the second round. I think a dream pick for me would be Xavier Legette, the receiver out of South Carolina. I don't at this point think he makes it past the Panthers' second round pick. I think they put a ton of interest in him. I think he is talented enough to go up that high. So I'm not expecting that to happen, but this is dream picks, right? So I think like that would be the guy who is a day 2 receiver that I could see. One, because I think he's not as refined, I don't think, obviously, and I don't know if he'll ever be the same like straight down the field threat that AJ Brown is, but body type wise, athleticism wise, like you could use those guys in similar ways. And I think in Arthur Smith's offense, we've already seen what that looks like. I think I'd love to replicate that type of skill set in his offense again. So those are 2 guys I'll give, and then I'll kind of let you guys go from there.
I was going to say Leggett in the second round.
Yeah.
I think he fits what you want or what Arthur Smith wants.
Exactly.
His complementary receivers. I don't really have a whole lot of first round dream picks because, again, I feel like the board's going to fall pretty well. You have all these quarterbacks that are going to push, players on the board. If you have 5 or 6 quarterbacks go off the board before pick, 20, you have just that many more options. You have so many offensive tackles, so many potential center options. So it's really hard for me to be like, oh, this is a dream. I do have some nightmare scenarios, which I know we're going to discuss.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah,
I think in the third round, I'll go back to you, Tommy. Mason Smith, give me him all day. Let him sit for a year. Let him build out his strength a little bit, and hope that he can kind of take over, get into more of a role next year. Kind of give him that redshirt year because he is really raw as a player, and he's kind of just been underwhelming every single season that he's been at LSU. So give him a chance to really learn behind Cam Hayward. I'd love to see that all day. I think Malachi Corey in the third round, another good option, just someone that can do a little bit more yards after the catch, get him the ball short, let him run long. Obviously, we're going to have a vertical element to our game with George Pickens still there, but I really feel like we want that stockier running back like receiver that can do some damage with the ball in his hands. Outside of that, I think if you do pass on a center in round 1, I think you can get one at pick 51 or maybe a minor trade up. I don't want to spoil anything in my mock draft, but we'll talk about that soon. But I think being able to get a center in the second round, that's kind of where I've circled where we're going to end up targeting our guy, assuming we don't go Graham Barton in the first. But again, no big dream picks in the first round, but I'd love to see Mason Smith in the third. I think that'd be great value for a player with his type of potential.
Yeah, and Andrew, I know what you mean by that because I look at all the guys that could potentially be available to the Steelers, and I just don't see any that are like, oh, you are easily in a tier above the rest of that group. And so I get what you mean by not having the dream picks there. For me, this is one of my biggest draft crushes is Brock Bowers. Like I love this guy.
Hilarious.
It makes no sense for the Steelers. They've already got tight ends. I would instantly have to put Freiermuth on the trade block. Sorry, you're gone after that. But I would find a way to funnel 150 targets to this guy who I think is going to be a beast after the catch in the NFL. Not realistic at all. But of the ones that are semi-realistic dream scenarios for the Steelers, I would have to point to Talisi Fuaga. He's the one that I think would be, to me, he's the sweet spot, right? He's not as big of a gamble as Mims, but also doesn't have that type of upside because he is lacking in length. And so I don't think he'll ever, if Mims hits his upside, he's a better pass protector in my mind than what Fuaga is going to be. But I like that Fuaga he's got those 2 good years of experience. He's graded out really well. He's a mauling run blocker. He has light feet for how big he is. To me, he reminds me a lot of Darnell Wright last year coming out. And so that one I would feel very, very comfortable with turning my pick in for him. Also, Troy Fautanu, the tackle from Washington here, because of his 5-position flexibility, I think that he could make a good center in the NFL. To me, he's kind of Graham Barton-like, except I have more hope for him sticking at tackle than I do with Barton because he does have the 34.5-inch arms. And so I think that those traits combined with his just like effortless movement ability. I mean, the guy moves like a tight end. And so I think that he could stick there in the NFL, but I think that he's a guy that worst scenario comes around and you find out that he's just okay at tackle. You want to kick him inside. I think you can do that with him too. And so those would be a couple of my dream picks there. Beyond that, like I'm stretching on this one a lot because I just don't think it's realistic. Darius Robinson in the second round, he's going to go somewhere between their first and second round pick. And same with Ladd McConkey, the Georgia wide receiver. Like to me, he's a guy, you put him in the slot, put him outside.
My comp for him is Deontay. So
yeah, I mean, I think he's a twitchier Deontay is who he is.
I think he's better
much better after the catch. Much
just because he runs forward, not backwards.
So,
that's really
now Deontay is an elite route runner, silky smooth player.
Yeah.
But I do think he's kind of a little bit like Jordan Addison, a little bit that way in terms of run after the catch ability. Not quite that twitched up. I'm sorry, not Jordan Addison. I'm thinking of Zay Flowers last year.
Oh,
kind of a comp between those guys. But Zay Flowers, how twitchy he was after the catch. He's not quite to that level, but he's a better happy medium because he's 2 inches taller, got a little bit more length to him. And so I think that you could play him on the outside in the NFL, and I think he can make a dynamic slot weapon as well. Beyond that, big Mike Stainer still fan. I would love for him to fall to the third round because of medicals and whatnot, but I don't know. I think
I don't think so.
Bound to go in the second. So that's basically what I have for my dream pick. So I wrote an article on it, and that's what I was going off of here for a second. All right, let's talk about nightmare scenarios now for the Steelers. These aren't as fun to do because we've seen nightmares happen, particularly in the final 5 years of Kevin Colbert. I was not a big fan of a lot of the selections that he made, but what would your nightmare scenario be for the Steelers at a couple levels of the draft here?
So for me, I'm going to start with this guy. I actually don't hate this player at all. I really don't. But I think if we were to stick and pick him at 20, it'd be a risk with his profile as a corner and also just not the value I'd want for him. That's Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. Like he's he's the only other player besides Mims who meets every requirement to be a first round pick based on like the pro day stuff and everything that we've been tracking for the Steelers. It's him and Mims that hit all four, I believe, right, Tommy? So he's a guy that I think in play at 20 if the board falls a certain way. And I just think it'd be a little bit rich. You know, I still have him as a fringe first round prospect on my board, but I'd much rather at that point, if he's like the best player in their eyes, I'd much rather than move back and take someone else later on in the first round. Maybe you could still get him even late in the first round, depending on who can do him. I think generally just reaching for a corner over a tackle or a lineman in general, or even a receiver. I just feel like the corners you can get down the board, especially the ones I like at least. Now, who knows what their opinions are on the corners, but I just think there's better value in that situation if you do that instead of taking corner early. So that's definitely a nightmare scenario for me. I think reaching on also a offensive lineman that isn't one of those premier guys, like one of those guys like Barton or, you know, we talked about Mims, Fatani, like reaching for, in my opinion, like a Tyler Guyton or something like that, which I don't think they really showed any interest in, but someone who isn't probably going to be ready to go and also might not have the same upside as a Mims. I will say the player that I didn't talk about because they weren't one of my favorite players and someone who I could also see the Steelers taking, J.C. Latham out of Alabama. I just think he's going to be a guard. I don't think he's going to stick at right tackle long term. Kind of feel that same way about Fuanga, not necessarily because he can't play tackle. Either of them really can't play tackle, but I think they both have like all pro guard potential with their size and power, and especially Fuanga's run blocking. Like they feel like guys who might be more valuable inside, and the Steelers, well, they need inside players maybe long term, depending what they do in the interior besides center. I need them to take a tackle. Like I can't do Dan Moore anymore, guys. Like I'll just say that like straight up, I can't do him anymore. let's figure that out first. So.
Don't you dare take the name of Dan Moore in vain. I can't believe it.
He's been sacrificed to the Wolves for 4 years, like for 3 years. Let's let him rest for a little bit. So.
You really think Latham's guard long term? I feel like with his length and his size, I know his athleticism concerns are there. On athletic tackles,
it's for me. It's more that I think he's so scared by speed to the edge. You can tell like he oversets so hard against speed, and it leaves like he can obviously get better at that, but it feels like he doesn't trust his feet and his ability to get to those guys naturally, and he has to kind of and especially when guys struggle with that. it makes me worry that the interior pressure is coming, because if teams know, like, okay, he's going to overset hard, we can stunt that direction. We can get maybe 2 guys coming at the quarterback from the inside lineman. Like, it just feels like a really easy way to end up having a really rough, like, rookie year at tackle. And then it's like, okay, well, now is he viewed poorly and maybe he does need to move. Like, I just feel like for his future, especially if he wants to be like a Pro Bowl all-pro player, he would be a mauling guard, and his pass protection would be much less of a concern for me inside. But and he could end up being a really good tackle. It just comes down to, like, would you rather have like an average tackle, in my opinion, if he sticks there, or a really, really good guard that could even be like an all-pro potential guy? So,
No, gotcha.
Yeah.
I would agree with the Wiggins on the nightmare pick. Out of all the cornerbacks, I'm not super keen on taking a cornerback in the first round to begin with. Just with his lack of weight, that just scares me. He's not very physical as a tackler. He obviously has that speed, which is good, but I just feel like he just doesn't fit what this team wants in their cornerbacks. So I would pass on him, again, in favor of targeting the line. I think taking a center outside of Graham Barton at pick 20 is a mistake. I think the centers are going to fall. I've been saying this for
I know you've been saying this for a while. Yeah, I know.
I mean, I did a study, and I mean, in the past 10
years.
You're
right. Statistically, you're right.
You've only had 3 centers go off the board before pick 51 once. That was when he had 2 go in the first round back in, I think, 2018, Billy Price, I think. So, yeah, I don't see the value in taking a Zach Frazier or a Jackson Powers Johnson. I think Barton has that upside of being one of the top centers in the league, assuming, he develops there. Obviously, it's a little bit of a projection. But if you trade back, I'm all for it. Take whatever center you want to take. You get some extra value from that. By all means, go for it. But if you're going to stick at 20, I don't think you can just taking either one of those players. And I think maybe not a nightmare pick, but a nightmare not pick. So if you do decide to not take a tackle in the first round, I think it would still be a mistake not to get one before day 3's up. It's very rare to see a tackle draft class this deep. I mentioned Patrick Paul as someone in the second round. I feel like in a normal given year, he's probably a late first round guy, just because you don't see a player with those kind of traits just lying around. You even talk about a Blake Fisher, someone you could probably get in the third round. Obviously, their ceilings aren't as high as some of the other names, but I don't know the next time you're going to see a tackle class this deep. So to completely bypass the position.
A lot of tackles. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like not taking one is going to be a mistake. Again, even if it's not in the first round, if you go elsewhere, I can understand that. I can live with that. But just completely avoiding the position, I feel like would be a really poor mistake for this team to do, especially when, again, I like Dan Moore more than most people. I understand that long-term, I don't want him starting. But, find someone, even if it's to develop for a year, he's probably going to leave as a free agent next year. And that gives you someone to plug and play, hopefully, and keep the tackle strong.
Yeah, I think you guys hit it on the head. Nate Wiggins, that's one. Did not check all the boxes I was hoping he would check. I said last week on the last week's pod, he deceived me a little bit. I thought he was longer than what he was.
His arm length is also,
inches. Yeah. But I think it was so deceiving because he was so skinny, and I thought he was a
lanky.
I thought he was lankier than what he was, and so coming in 173 pounds, sub 31-inch arms. Those are 2 things right there. He missed half the season last year. Only played 400 and some odd snaps. He scares me a little bit. I do like his play style. I do think he's a fit with Joey Porter. I think it's a little bit rich. I've got a 2nd round grade on him. And so I think he's a guy that falls into the early 30s or late in the first round. I would let somebody else take the gamble on that one. Yeah. And the number 1 guy for me of things that could realistically happen, and this scares me, I cannot take Zach Frazier in the first round. I cannot do it. That's my nightmare scenario, because to me, my mentality is I want to find cornerstone foundational pieces. I want to swing for the fences with that first round pick. And to me, you're hitting a single, maybe a double with that pick. Like, I've watched hours of Zach Frazier film, and I guess I'm not getting the buzz that everybody else is getting. I think his frame is maxed out at 6'2". You can't add any more weight. He doesn't carry it particularly well. I know he's got long arms and big hands. Big hands is probably the best trait that he has going for him. Didn't grade out particularly well. I don't think that he moves like a special athlete. I don't think that he has special power. Like, all of his traits to me scream early day 2 pick and not a guy that should be taken in the first round. And honestly, I do not believe that the gap between Frazier and Cedric Van Pran is as large as the media is making it out to be. There are some things that I absolutely like better about Van Pran than Frazier. And so Frazier's still the 3rd center that I would take in this draft class. I just would not take him in the first round. I feel like that's a guy that you might find in free agency from 4 years, or if you do give him a second contract, he's a guy that's just a good starting center. I think that's what you're getting, a quality starting center. And I want to shoot a little bit bigger than that, especially considering offensive tackle and other positions are just more important and they get paid after a while. We just saw Lloyd Cushenberry get $12 million a year and graded out as a top 10 center in the NFL last year. And so the value, if you do hit on that, it's a high floor with a low reward type pick for me. So I really don't want Frazier in the first round at all. Shayne, is there any chats that we want to get to before we move on?
Yes, I did want to get a couple here before you get going. How do you guys feel in case the Steelers pick wide receiver until the 4th round? Assuming that means 4, not Fox. For example, Luke McCaffrey. I think McCaffrey's probably a little bit later day 3 pick, just because I think the upside isn't really there, but I do think he's a quality player. Like I could see him being like a slot only kind of, bigger bodied slot receiver. I think he's got really good hands. The athleticism he showed off a decent amount, especially at the combine. I thought he did well there. I do want to see a receiver added in some capacity before then, though. I think if it's not in trade, then it's in the draft earlier. Yeah.
It's a fair point, though, because the Steelers don't have a 5th round pick. Like ideally, that's where I'd like to grab him. 4th round, I can get on board with that. I have a 4th round grade on McCaffrey. I do think that he's right in that quality player. But I have a cluster of receivers that I have a 4th round grade on this year. So I guess it depends on which one would be highest on my board at that time. I do think that he's good at catching the ball in traffic, and I think that he would be at least an on value pick at that point. Any others?
Andrew, your thoughts on that? Oh yeah, Andrew, you can mention what you have to say about McCaffrey if you want.
Oh yeah, sure. Again, I like him as a player. I think he'd be a good slot option, but if you're taking a receiver in the 4th or one of your 6th round picks, it better be a second receiver. You better have already gotten one.
That's my point.
You need someone before that.
Whether it's a trade or another draft pick, he can't be the first guy you add to the room. I agree with that. This one's interesting too. You think if Barton is the pick, you can lean on him being a guard or a tackle. I think he can be a right tackle in Smith's system, and see how the tackle and center board works out. For me, the more I watch him now, I will say Barton is let me double check here. He's the 16th player on my board. I think that if you really wanted him to be a right tackle, especially, I think he can. I know the length isn't there, but I do view him in the same way, like as an athlete, as like the Slaters of the world, like guys that are just so technically sound and so athletic that they can hang a tackle, or in Slater's case, be a really great tackle. Now, I think that he is a guard or more likely a center in the NFL. I think as a center, he'd be unbelievable because of the length is still good for a center, even though it's a shade under 33. The athleticism, I mean, his RAS at center is like, I think maybe top 3 all time, if I remember. Like his athleticism scores are through the roof for that position. However, if you absolutely needed him to, I do think you would get average right tackle play out of him if you really needed him to. It's just not where he should play long term. Same thing with guard. Like I like him at guard too because of the athleticism as a polar and what he can do at the second level. But even better at center, though, is the main problem.
Yeah, I think you're talking about someone that it's like a square peg into a round hole. You could play him at tackle and you'll probably be able to hold up okay, but I don't think he's going to reach his ceiling in terms of what he can be. I think you're talking about a potentially elite. Kind of flip-flop those positions, just because with that you don't need as long of arms, but he's a great athlete for either one of those spots. So I think if you take him, you should be doing with the intention of moving him to the interior. But I mean, if you really wanted him as a tackle, you could try him there first. I just think with his arm length, don't force it when you can get good play from probably somewhere else, better play arguably than what you'd get at tackle.
Right. Yeah, I'll reiterate that as well. I do think that he could be a serviceable tackle if he stays at the right side. I think zone team is the only team it's going to work for. I think like Brian O'Neill, Bernard Ryman, these are some recent examples that have worked out well of guys who don't hit the arm length threshold. I think that Barton is talented enough to do that. He will always have some limitations because you've always got to be in the right position when you have sub 33-inch arms. And so that's my fear. I think he actually projects best as a guard. The Steelers don't really need a guard, but center, I think, would work out perfect for him, even though it is a bit of a projection too. He's got a taller frame. And so I know he played that back as a freshman at Duke. So I don't think he's as surefire of a thing as some others do, but I do think he will find a home somewhere on the offensive line. Is going to be a good player. Any other, Shayne?
No, I think that's the main ones I wanted to get to right now. Yeah.
All right. Let's hit this really quick, and then we'll get on to our mock draft because we've got we're running a little bit long on this show today. Trade scenarios for the Steelers. We talked about Brandon Ayuk, Cortland Sutton. Is there anything else the Steelers can do? Last year, a week before they draft, they traded for Allen Robinson. During the draft, they traded twice up to pick 14 for Broderick Jones, and then back again in the third round to take Darnell Washington and recoup a fourth round pick, which ended up being Nick Herbig. So it worked out pretty well in their favor, I would say. Yeah. So what do you see them doing, guys, this year in the draft? Do you think that, I know based on Omar Khan's comments, a trade back kind of sounds unlikely. If they do trade up, do you think it'll be in the first round? Do you think it'll be later in the draft? Do you think they can trade back later in the draft to try to get extra day 3 draft capital? What do you think?
I think for me, it is likely that if the tackle run starts happening ahead of them, I could see them trying to move up with maybe a team like the Jaguars, if the Jaguars think they can get their corner receiver they want at 20 instead. Or, whoever it might be, to maybe jump in front of a team like the Bengals, where maybe they want to take a right tackle in the future with Trent Brown under 1-year deal for them, right? Something like that. I could see like a small move up, not the type of move up we're seeing that Pauline was talking about with the Broncos. I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. But something a little bit smaller for, less capital, I could definitely see them doing. And then in the second round, I could also see them moving up to get, one of JPJ, Zach Frazier, one of those, the second or third center off the board, like Andrew's talking about, if those guys fall to that range, which is statistically likely, right? It doesn't guarantee it, because this draft is a little bit weird to me a little bit in that way, but I could see that happening, especially with Powers Johnson's got some medical stuff. I know, Tommy, you've talked about, there's some stuff there that you've heard like that could move him down. And if you can get him in the second round, especially anywhere close to 51, I'm running the card in. I think he's an awesome player, so I'm fine with that. But I think those would be the two probably that I'd be looking at them maybe doing if they feel the need to do so.
I think the only thing I'll add on to that, I agree with, I don't really see a trade up in the first round. I just again, I think the board's going to break really well. There's so many tackles.
You hope so, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like there's going to be someone there. A trade back may be feasible, but I don't really buy it because this team is just not common for them to trade back in the first. I will say with the caveat with Ayuk, if something does happen there, I think trade up from 31, like a pick swap 31 for 20, along with whatever else gets entailed in that. I think that could be very much in play if the Steelers are going to make a move for Ayuk. Not saying it's going to happen, but I think that could be a big chunk of the deal, especially then so the 49ers can move up and try to get a receiver, since they'll need to replace him with him going out the door.
I actually had a comment similar to that, Andrew, so I wanted to throw that up there too. But yeah.
And I think that Omar Khan has been so aggressive and so not complacent since he's become the general manager. I mean, he's traded Kevin Green, Kendrick Green, Kevin Dotson, traded for Allen Robinson, traded away Kenny Pickett, traded for Justin Fields. He traded up for Broderick Jones. I don't know how content he's going to be to sit there if there's a guy that he really likes. And so I do think that it's possible the Steelers trade up a couple of spots to get the player that they're eyeing, or maybe that's Fuanga if he ends up slipping, and maybe it's Amarius Mims, if the guy that checks all the boxes for them. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that. And then maybe a follow-up trade is to move back again, try to recoup a little of that capital, something like they did last year. So let's skip over the bold predictions for now, because I want to make sure that we each have time to go into detail on our mock drafts. And we're each going to give our 7-round mocks now. And for this exercise, what Shayne and Andrew and I did is we tried to accurately predict what the Steelers will do in the draft starting tomorrow and running through Saturday. This is not a what would you do mock. We did that a few weeks back as one of our exercises. This is what do we think the Steelers are going to do. We're trying to get as many of their selections right as possible. So Shayne, let's start with you. Walk us through your 7-round picks for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
All right, so we're going to kick things off with kind of banking on everything we know about the Steelers, how they do things, how I think the board will fall. I do think this first pick is Amarius Mims. I do think that's going to be the tackle that comes off the board for them. I do think it's totally possible that a team like the Bengals or someone ahead of them does like Mims a lot and does decide to take him. That's where I think a trade-up could happen if the tackle run starts, where if they're really set on Mims and they don't know if he's going to be there, I could see a small move up similar to what they did for Broderick Jones last year. But one way or another, I do think that they're going to try to come away with Amarius Mims. All the tea leaves point that way. The need is there. Obviously, you can get the teammates back together. Steelers love, family ties. Let's do some teammate ties, right? Let's do, I think that that's definitely what they want to do based on what we've seen so far. And I think that they're going to make it happen. For me, I stayed at 20. I didn't do any trades, just as a, heads up. I just don't like to do that typically if I'm predicting. Too hard to do that. But I do have them taking Mims at 20.
All right, Shayne, do you want to run through the rest of your mock, or do we want to do round by round?
I can run through the rest of it if you guys want me just to run through it here. So, and just a few words on each thing. So at 51, this is a player that I'm hoping is there if Leggett isn't. I think this is kind of my second receiver in this range that I'm looking to try to grab, and it's Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I think he does everything really well. I think he'd be a great complement to Pickens, where he's more of the kind of reliable, like underneath target, especially who has enough speed to kind of threaten vertically. But, Pickens can be that vertical threat. Pearsall can be the intermediate one. I think they're a really good combination there. It's tough with him because I don't know if he's going to be there. There's so much. The receivers are so weird because there's so many of them that theoretically any of them could fall to that point, but also none of them might be there. So it's kind of like, all right, you got to kind of take your shot. For me, it's Pearsall at 84. And there's another player that might be drafted sooner than this, Mason McCormick, South Dakota State. I think he's a center. I think he should play center. I think his athleticism especially would be so valuable at center to get to the second level. We test as one of the best athletes ever. And one of the things I heard actually about him, and this is one of the reasons why I went with him over some of the other center options that I could have gone, is when he was at the Shrine Bowl, he was talking to, I think it's Bootleg Football Guys is where I heard this from, talking about like, would he want to play center? He said, yeah, I definitely want to play center. And he actually made the calls for their line this year because their center's a younger player than him. So he doesn't, not quite as good at doing that. So he actually is already used to that aspect of it, which is great. It's just, snapping and getting used to that, but he's been doing that throughout the draft process. I think he could come in right away and be a really quality center. And then at 98, another guy that I don't like as much. I will say I didn't say anything about it when we were talking about it earlier with our players, but someone I definitely think the Steelers are interested in, and I think is their type of player they'd want to grab, Mason Smith, LSU. I think he could go earlier than this because of the potential that people see in him. I just think his tape was just not good enough to warrant anything outside of day 3 for me. But I could easily see them doing this, especially if he falls all the way to 98. And then this one's more of a wild card. I couldn't really find a player that both like fit what they were looking at, the players they brought in for visits, all that stuff. And I went with a position that I think still needs bodies there, and especially one that might be able to play year 1 if you need him to, because he is one of the more, maybe not high upside guys, but I think who could play right away a little bit. Cedric Gray, the linebacker out of North Carolina, at 119. I think he's one of the few guys in this class of linebacker that, although, again, I don't know if the upside's very high, I think he kind of already knows how to play linebacker, where a lot of the other guys are more athletes trying to figure it out. If you need someone to step in, especially with Holcomb expected to probably miss time to start the year, Roberts is probably the second linebacker with Queen being brought in. I think he could actually step in and kind of do everything well enough to keep that unit together if he had to come in and play. So I added him at the first 6th-round pick at 178. Bo Braid, the safety out of Maryland. Now, I know Maryland guy. Oh, got my Maryland guy. Yeah, there you go. Mike Tomlin, here's your Maryland guy. I know that's not actually a real big thing, but it's not as funny. I just want to add some safety depth. They brought in, can't remember his name right now, of course, the safety from Miami that they brought in the free agency. But I think they still need safety depth there.
Elliott.
Right. Yeah, Deshaun Elliott, right. They still need safety depth. I don't really love the guys that have been in that room in the past couple of years outside of Minka, especially with Edmonds gone from last year. So get some more safety depth. And then my last pick at 196 is it? I forget. 195. Daquan Hardy, a personal favorite of mine out of Penn State. Slot corner, really physical, really quick player, got a lot of athleticism to him. Punt return value as well. I think he'd be a good punt returner for you if you need him to be. And more importantly, we have nobody who I actually think should play slot on this team. And maybe he shouldn't be a player, that starts right away, but I think he could at least play slot if the need were to arise, even as a rookie possibly. So,
all right, nice. Andrew?
Well, I will roll through mine. We have a couple familiar names not starting off in the first round. I got Amarius Mims as well. I just think that the Steelers are kind of really just have him circled as their top choice. The board breaks as many expected to, and he should be available, just considering how deep the offensive tackle class is and the issues that you brought up, his inexperience and all that. I think you take him, and you have to understand that it's high risk, high reward. Either he's going to hit it out of the park, and you could be looking at a legitimate top tackle just with the traits, with the size, with the athleticism, or it's someone that might not work out, and you're going to have a bust on your hands. Like I think it's going to be one way or the other. I don't think you're going to get a big in between. I think taking him, you still might have a Dan Moore, Broderick Jones starting combination because he might need some time to get ready. But I'm willing to take that kind of a risk at pick 20. I'm all about this tackle class. I want to get someone with some high end upside, and I think Mims is the perfect prospect for that. And again, I'm more gearing towards offensive tackle than center. Rolling into the second round, I got my Babe Ruth. I'm pointing out, I'm calling my shot. I got Jackson Powers Johnson coming in as the center at pick 51. Now, I didn't do any trades in this mock either, just because they're way too hard to predict. This might require a small trade up. Again, I think historically you haven't seen more than 3 centers go before pick 51 in the past 10 years, except for one draft class. Typically, you see 1 or 2 go. Assuming you count Graham Barton as a center, I think he's the only guy round. I am buying into the Frazier over Powers Johnson rumors that are going around. I think he will be the second center off the board. And with that, I will say that Powers Johnson makes his way down towards where the Steelers are picking. Again, maybe you move up a couple spots to secure him, whatever that looks like. But again, I've said the second round, that's the sweet spot for center. And I think that's where they go. The alternative, I guess, would be Frazier if, I have those flipped and those rumors aren't true. But I put Powers Johnson there all further than most expect. I mean, you go last year, John Michael Schmitz fell. A couple years ago, Creed Humphrey fell. It's not uncommon to see those top perceived centers, get pushed down the board. Heading into the third round, I want to make sure we get a receiver locked up. They've shown a lot of interest in Malachi Corley. Again, he fits that mold of that, running back in a receiver's body type thing, catch the ball short, run long with it. You definitely need to scheme around him a little bit. He might need some seasoning before he's going to be a legitimate weapon for this team. And so you kind of got to expect that. Maybe you look the, veteran route to get someone else in the room so you're not forcing him onto the field too early. But I think that in time, he can be a very good complement in this offense. Probably never a guy that you're going to be, featuring like a Pickens, ideally, like how you want to feature him, but someone that can work as that second target for a team and provide something different that this offense doesn't have and hasn't really had in a while. Another copycat, I got Mason Smith in the third round. I think this team's all over him. You didn't see Carl Dunbar travel a lot during this offseason, but he did stop off at LSU. Now that is his alma mater, so that makes sense in that regard. But you also have just this perfect fit, a young guy that can develop, that can take some time. Again, it's a third round pick. Typically, you want to see playing time. I would give him a redshirt year. You got enough depth on, give enough depth on the line right now to just let him sit. Add a little bit of muscle to his frame, learn behind Cam Hayward, and then hopefully this time next year we're talking about him being in the rotation as a potential starter. Again, he fits that mold. You don't see a lot of guys like this anymore with the long arms, the height, the weight. Get the guy that fits that system that they want, and he makes sense. I got Trevin Wallace, the linebacker out of Kentucky, in the fourth round. Aaron Curry's been hot on the trail. They're going to pick a linebacker at some point. I think you take a guy here that has all the traits. I'm kind of the opposite. He has all the traits, but he doesn't really know how to play linebacker yet. He doesn't have the good instincts. He struggles to read the play at the line when it's going, but he has the athleticism you want. He has good size. I think he can develop into a pretty good coverage player. And again, he's a guy that you don't need a linebacker to get on the field right now. So he's a guy that can, work on his craft a little bit, play a lot of special teams early on. And then ideally, whenever, assuming Cole Holcomb does come back, he's probably not going to be around long term now with Patrick Queen in the fold. Landon Roberts isn't probably going to be around past this season. Maybe this is a guy that you can pair next to Queen long term and have two, good athletes. Then I doubled up on secondary in the 6th round. Just a position that fell. I think you're going to have those needs fall just because you don't have enough picks right now to fill everything. MJ Devonshire, cornerback out of Pittsburgh. I mentioned him previously. Again, a guy that I think you can play on the outside or start him there. I think he could develop into a good, not great second option, a guy that can hold his own. He has the length. He has the athleticism to hold on the outside. If he really does struggle there, you can move him to the slot, and I think he can thrive there. It's a good coverage option out of the slot. And then Daquan Hardy is the other 6th round pick that I have, someone that, I know, another copycat, right? Someone that I think you can put into the slot right away, can kind of work those rundowns. He plays like his hair is on fire, and just a guy that you don't really have on the roster. You haven't had really since Mike.
A lot of Hilton-y vibes.
So it gives you potentially
a lot of Hilton vibes.
Yeah. So it gives you potential 2 slot option guys. Again, I really think Devonshire can work on the outside, different body type than what they have, but he can start off in that rotation there. And then again, hopefully one of these guys can pan out in the slot, so you get that guy that you just haven't had since Hilton.
All right. I like it. We are on the same wavelength here for some things. And so I'm going to kick my mock off here. Before I do that, I want to give myself just a little pat on the back, just a little bit. Last year, I predicted the Steelers would have to move up a few spots and take Broderick Jones in the first round. I normally don't predict trade ups either, but the trail of breadcrumbs led us to the feet of Broderick Jones. I'm not going to overthink it this year. I know that everybody's hot on Graham Barton right now. Those breadcrumbs are leading to Amarius Mims. He's checked every single box so far. He was reported to have the pro day dinner meeting. They met with him formally at the NFL Combine. They brought him in for a pre-draft visit. The Steelers seem to have a lot of interest in this guy. So that is my selection at pick 20. Can't say for sure that he's going to be there. I heard the Bengals really like him, especially if Bowers is off the board at that point. So it could be a situation where maybe Omar Khan does get aggressive for the guy that he really likes in this draft. I would consider other guys here like Barton, like a Talisi Fuaga if he fell. Surprisingly, Nate Wiggins is the other guy that checks all those boxes like we talked about.
I was worried about it. Yeah.
So, and again, it can't rule him out either. I just think that it's going to be Mims at the end of the day. We know how much Omar Khan and Andy Weidel stress the offensive line. We know how much they like big, long, powerful offensive linemen. He fits that bill. You can pair him, and we know how much Tomlin and Khan want Broderick to be able to move back to his natural position. So I think that one makes too much sense to ignore. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm going with Amarius Mims at pick 20 in round 1. Round 2, I'm on the same page as you, Shane. I've got Ricky Pearsall for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I contemplated between several receivers here.
Me too.
And the center option is intriguing. Like you said, based on your studies, Andrew, there should be a center there. But all these guys are just getting mocked so high recently. And I know that it's very possible that one falls out of there. I don't trust that to be the case still. And I want to see, I hope that you're right, because I want that, I want that study to be proven correct. But I'd like to be the Steelers be able to get a center without having to trade up. I do think though, if those three guys are gone, I think that receiver is going to be where the value lies, and they're going to have a decision to make between several players here. There are guys that I don't like at all that I really hope they don't go that direction. Like, I'm not a big Troy Franklin fan. I'm not a big Devontae Walker fan. I like guys that can catch the ball with their hands and not have to be body catchers. And so I know some people are big on those guys with their athletic traits. Ricky Pearsall is a guy who checks a lot of boxes. The Steelers met with him formally at the Combine. He was a pre-draft visit by the Steelers. Yep. He's got great athletic traits, good enough size. I think he can play in the slot, play outside, run routes, catch the ball in traffic. And so that's why I went with him. I think that he does pair well with Pickens as a complement, a guy that can do a lot of the stuff underneath with Pickens doing a lot of the deeper stuff there. I considered going with a guy like Xavier Legette, Mike Sanders still here, maybe a Braden Fisk and a Malachi Corley. Those are some other options. We're all three. Mason Smith in the 3rd round. I got him at 84.
Right.
I don't think he's going to last much longer than that if he's here Probably for this not. Pick, just because the guys with these types of traits go high in the draft, regardless of what you think of their tape. They get drafted, and I would go as far to say they get overdrafted.
Yes.
But I think it's almost what you have to do for guys with this size and profile like this, with that type of length. You just don't get them very often. I've got Mason Smith going to the Steelers because of the interest in him. And it just seems like they want that tall, long defensive lineman. He fits the bill there. I considered some others here: Cedric Van Pran, Malachi Corley, Andrew Phillips, the cornerback from Kentucky, and Blake Fisher, had they not already gone offensive tackle. Yeah, pick 98, their 2nd, 3rd round pick. I kind of hedged my bets a little bit here. I went with Cedric Van Pran. I don't know if he's going to be here. I wanted to get one of these right in the 3rd round. I think that we might be overlooking a little bit their interest in Van Pran. They did not bring him in for a pre-draft visit. He does not a particularly great fit for a wide zone, but neither is Amarius Mims, and they might just not care. Last year, they drafted 2 Georgia Bulldogs in their top 3 picks inside the 3rd round twice. They could do it again this year with Mims and Van Pran. I've got both of them heading to the Steelers. If they miss out on the first wave of centers, I think Van Pran is a good consolation prize. He might not be an ideal scheme fit, but I like his tape better than most. This time last year, he was talked about as a 1st-round center. I know that he didn't deserve to be talked about that way, but the tape is not nearly as bad as to drop him down into the hundreds like some people have him. I think that he's deserving of going somewhere in the middle of 3rd round, early 4th round type of players. I've got him at pick 98 for the Steelers. Heading on over to the 4th round selection, I've got Daquan Hardy in the 4th round. And the reason why is because this need becomes so pressing at this point. I don't know if the Steelers would be willing to wait. And again, we don't have a 5th round pick. Maybe they'll move some things around to get one of those. That's where I'd like to take him. But I think that's because the need for you literally don't have a slot cornerback on your roster. I think that they could view it as a big enough need where they will take, in their mind, the player they believe is the best slot option who can come in and play right away. I do like Hardy. I like him better in the 6th round. Obviously, I'd like to be able to spend that 4th round pick elsewhere, but I think that they don't risk it any further than this. I have them taking their slot cornerback in the 4th round with Daquan Hardy. 6th round, I've got Josh Proctor, the safety out of Ohio State, going to the Steelers. If he's on the board, I think it's solid value at this point. He could fall. He's 25 years old already, just turned 25 before the draft. And he doesn't have all that much college experience for how long he's been in college. So I think that he's a guy at this stage in the draft, you're looking for guys that can make your roster. I think a safety on day 3 could make Pittsburgh's roster. They just don't have a lot of depth there. Proctor is a decent prospect, not going to offer a lot of upside or anything, but a guy that can stick around for a while, carve out a special teams role, maybe see the field a little bit on defense. And for my final 6th round pick 195 of the Steelers, I spent far too long on this because I went with a linebacker. And I didn't go with a linebacker that I kind of wanted to go with, that I think that they might have interest in, because the guys that I were considering before I get to my pick, I considered Michael Barrett from Michigan. I considered Steel Chambers from Ohio State. The Steelers like those schools. They would like the tenacity these guys bring, the physical, hard-nosed play style. But when I looked at Omar Khan's draft last year, I mean, Khan and Weidl value athletic traits. They didn't take anybody who wasn't an athlete last year. And so for me, it was hard to get behind guys who tested as poor athletes.
Right.
So I found a happy medium. I went with Nathaniel Watson, the Mississippi State linebacker, better athlete than those two. The tape is just okay from what I've seen. I haven't grinded a lot of his tape yet. But I do think that he's a guy that kind of fits that mold. I think they brushed shoulders with him for kind of just an informal meeting. Somebody reported at the back at the NFL Combine. And so there's a little bit of interest there. Still comes from a big school in the SEC. And so I can see them going with that player because it's a little bit better athlete. And I would be surprised if they escaped the draft without taking a linebacker this year. So I've got them valuing that the least out of all the positions that are on the dock for them this year. All right. If you guys have any thoughts on that, please drop them in on the chat. I'm very interested, guys, to see how many of these picks, if any, will get right for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I got the Broderick Jones pick right last year, but I got nothing right after that. They decided to go a different direction.
Yeah. For me, it was ended up, I didn't take him in the right spots, but Joey and Keanu I got right for the Steelers. Oh, nice. So okay. I did get both of them right. But.
All right. We spend a lot of time on this, and so we're hoping that we can get several of these selections right for the Steelers. And obviously, we're just hoping more than anything just for a good draft. Last year's draft. So my mock last year was the Steelers crushed what I did in my mock. I just didn't think that Darnell Washington was going to be there in round 3 and Nick Herbig in round 4, Corey Trice in round 7. And so I want something similar. Like I was very, very pleased with last year's results. If Omar Khan, Andy Weidl can give us something similar this year, I will take that to the bank. I will be pleased with that for sure. All right, guys. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for joining us as a guest today. And thank you all
thanks for
joining us here. We go live every Wednesday. Next week at this time, we will rehash everything that happened with the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL draft. And Shayne and I will share our thoughts. We'll maybe even give some grades on these selections, some early grades. And so join us for that, please. Also, we're going to be doing lots of coverage on the NFL draft on stillcurtain.com. So make sure you're following along. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow Andrew on Twitter at False Andrew. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.